it's the relations between Russia and our country, in a sense, are becoming very difficult. Let's put it that way, under President Trump, which was not what we expected. But there are other things to be concerned about with regard to Russia and the former Soviet Union, and that's what we are going to talk about today. Because when the Soviet Union fell 25 years ago, there was a big opportunity for Christianity in Russia, and then in all the former countries under the Soviet regime, and we have taken advantage of that. Many Christian groups have gone to Russia, and there's one in particular that we are going to talk about today. Their work has been so effective across that region, and still is. And that goes on no matter what the news is here in the U.S. with regard to whether or not Russia stole or caused our election to be stolen, and what the sanctions are and what's happening in Syria. The work of Slavic Gospel Association continues. And with me are two leaders of that organization. One is Michael Johnson, and he is president, very newly installed as president of SGA. And I have to say that I've known Michael a long time. He had a career in advertising with Saatchi & Saatchi in New York, and then the Bloom Agency and Gray Advertising. And that was woven in with a career in missions and also helping Christian ministries with their development and fundraising. And, I mentioned that he is an old friend. I actually met Michael because he was a friend of my husband when we were dating, and Michael was in my wedding. And in and out of the years that have ensued, we've seen each other, we've worked together, and we've actually fallen in love with the Slavic Gospel Association. And he worked there for many years as vice president, went off and did other things, and now, as the founding president retired, he has been pulled back into the organization. And we are so thrilled that he is. And Michael, Michael is now president of SGA. And Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Penna, and thank you for that introduction. It's so great to be on the program with you. I know I've been on in the past, many years ago. And that's when we first reconnected after not seeing each other for over 20 years. And your first comment to me was, we thought we lost you, but then we found each other, and we've been connected ever since. So it's just so great to be on your program. I look forward to the hour.
Michael walked into the studio. I knew I was interviewing somebody. This was back in early 2000s, I think. I was interviewing somebody from SGA named Michael Johnson, but I did not connect that in my mind. We had kind of lost each other. We'd both moved all over the country. And it was so great to reconnect at that time. So hence we have this interview today. And also joining us also from Ukraine is Eric Mock, and he is vice president of ministry operations. And he's got a background in military flight test and space systems. And he's also an ordained minister, and he's got a master's of divinity from Southern Baptist Seminary. But he's been with SGA quite a while. He travels and ministers throughout the Russian-speaking nations and the USA. And, he informs people and helps them to understand this work. And Eric, thank you so much. Tell us the name of the city that you're in right now.
Well, hi, Penna. It's wonderful to be able to use modern technology and reach out to you from Zaporozhye, Ukraine, southeastern Ukraine. And it's been a wonderful few days of ministry here, and it's a joy to be with you today.
Well, we want to hear about the ministry, but I think the thing I want to do is a little bit lay the groundwork. And Michael, you might do this with me because, I mentioned that when the Soviet Union fell, we had these great opportunities, and that's when SGA began to take advantage of those, correct?
Correct, yeah. But just a little background. The Slavic Gospel Association was established back in 1934 by a Russian immigrant, Belarusian immigrant by the name of Peter Danica. And Peter Danica came to this country, got saved through the ministry of the Moody Church, and the Lord placed in his heart just a tremendous passion for his fellow Russians, both living under communism in the Soviet Union, as well as Russian immigrant populations around the world in North America, South America, Europe, Australia. And so for many years, we were involved in the covert distribution of books and Bibles into those countries under the Iron Curtain. Also, we had a significant radio broadcast ministry in partnership with groups like Transworld Radio and HCJB and FEBC. And Peter had this, he had a saying, much prayer, much power. In fact, he wrote a book called Much Prayer, Much Power, and he would conduct all-night prayer vigils, praying for the people in the former Soviet Union that God would protect them, and also for the spread of the gospel in those countries. He prayed that until his dying day, and he died, passed away. He went to be with the Lord about 2 years before the wall came down. And what a glorious answer to prayer that was. And when the country opened up, we went to the evangelical churches, specifically the Baptist churches, and asked them what their priorities were, and because our goal was to serve their churches. And we went in and we found these faithful brothers and sisters who had been persecuted and oppressed, but they were joyous over the opportunities that God was opening up now that the wall came down. And there were a lot of opportunities, a lot of people going over there, but their key priorities, it turned out to be our key priorities. And the first one was that they needed help in training their pastors and leaders in sound theology, because as most of your listeners probably know, Russia essentially missed the Reformation, and there really wasn't a training infrastructure there. So we helped to build and establish many of the early seminaries and Bible institutes that are training pastors today. And then the second one was to help sponsor, national church planting missionaries once they graduated and send them out into previously unreached towns and villages so that they can plant new Bible preaching churches. And that's been going on, for many, many years. And we're now seeing just tremendous fruit and tremendous opportunities to further expand the gospel. And the third priority was to equip them with resources so that they can meet the physical and the spiritual needs of the people in those communities so that they could be lights for the gospel. And we help them in their ministry to orphans. We help them in their ministry to Chernobyl victims. We help them in their ministry to young people by helping them to go to Christian camps. We help in evangelism activities through scripture distribution, through church planting activities. And as a result of the partnership that we have with these national churches, we're just seeing tremendous growth in the churches and many people coming to faith in Christ and many people being discipled.
This is a wonderful testimony of success. We are going to discuss this in detail with Mike Johnson and also Eric Mock. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a lot more.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
We've heard quite a bit these days about fake news, but what about fake science? That is the title of a book by Austin Ruse. He has served as the president of the Center for Family and Human Rights, where he testifies to our government and the United Nations about important issues. He was on my radio program recently to talk about some of the misinformation and false information presented in the media and in various governmental hearings. Some of the book deals with homosexuality and the transgender issue. One chapter addresses whether homosexuals are born that way and whether orientations are immutable. In other words, can people change their sexual orientation? Another chapter addresses the studies that attempt to argue that there is no difference between traditional parents and homosexual parents rearing children. This grand experiment on children has been detrimental to their physical and psychological health. That is why he wanted to set the record straight. Some states have very strict labeling laws for food. Even a minuscule amount of a naturally occurring chemical must have a warning label. But Austin Ruse points out that in order to hit the cancer target zone for acrylamide, a child would have to eat 182 pounds of French fries every single day. A teenager wouldn't even do that on a dare. For decades, Austin Ruse has been testifying on pro-life issues. He reminds us in one chapter that nearly everything the secular media and pro-abortion groups say about abortion is a lie. The same could be said about these groups and what they say about sex education. And he laments how the population control advocates are driving many countries towards a demographic winner. I recommend you read the book, and if you're skeptical of the claims, check out the more than 40 pages of endnotes documenting his critique of fake science. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. I have posted at pointofview.net a link to Slavic Gospel Association where you can find out more. You can also, if you go to pointofview.net, see the pictures and bios of our two guests, Mike Johnson and Eric Mock. And I've put up an article to give you just a bit of education. It was actually published at the end of last year. And it talks about, it's in the Washington Times, and it talks about the fate of religious freedom in the former USSR. And it lists all the countries and what's, a little bit about what's going on there. One of those countries is the place where Eric is right now, which is Ukraine. Eric, tell us a little bit about what you are doing there. Do you spend a good bulk of your time over there in Ukraine, or are you all over the place?
Well, thanks for asking. I guess the answer to that question is a little bit of all over the place. but for a majority of the work that SGA does, we are, in fact, in Russia, in Ukraine, and Belarus. One of the unique aspects of SGA is that we work with the indigenous churches. Rather than come in from the point of view of a Western initiative, bringing in a Western style of ministry, we're really focused on equipping the local Bible-driven, Bible-teaching church to be the arms and legs for Christ's sake to reach their own community. It gives us a much more beautiful ministry that actually kind of dances around a lot of the changes in legislation that you'll see in the papers. We seek more to be invisible than making a visible presence. And by supporting the nationals, they're the ones that will be there for quite some time. So we travel around to the regions and churches where God has raised up these churches and equip them the various ways that Michael alluded to be more fruitful, not really to plant them, but to be more fruitful in advancing the gospel. So
the churches, most of them that you visit or that Mike visits when he's over there, or any of the people that you perhaps have there, they've been in existence. Your job is to help them, and then all kinds of other ministries also, like orphanages and summer camps and things.
Yeah, one of the mistakes that can easily be made is that you create ministry because you have money. We kind of take a different approach. Even in our training centers, we want to see students in those centers that have been actively serving in ministry. So what we do is we work with the local, regional, and national level churches who are the faithful Bible-teaching churches, and we look for what they are doing. In the far east of Russia, you see a place that is really a frontier. It's ministry where there are literally hundreds of villages built with people that have never heard the gospel. To the far west of Russia, where you have a majority of the population, and you're dealing with really the same thing we deal with, a lot of either theological confusion or religious confusion, and you're trying to get behind the churches to equip them with both sound theological training, but also the ability to reach those in need. Working with 700,000 orphans in Russia alone is a daunting task, and right now, we're working with about 8,000 of them, and that process is done by looking for the local churches that are already doing the ministry and getting behind what God is doing with them.
I do remember that a lot of Americans would adopt Russian orphans, and then the Russian government put a stop to it. Orphans are numerous in Russia because of drug and alcohol problems, right?
Well, let me give you some quick numbers on that. 70% of the orphans that are in these orphanages are social orphans. What that means is there's a living mother or father. It could be due to poverty. It could be imprisonment. It could be alcohol and drug use. But about 70% of them have a living parent, where 30% of them are true orphans. Only the true orphans can be adopted. The last numbers I saw showed that international adoptions was somewhere around 1.1, 1.2%. You add that to the adoptions that are made by families in Russia, that leaves about 84% of the kids that are in these orphanages, 84% that have no shot of being adopted. And so we have taken an angle that we want to equip the churches to reach to 84%. These kids that by the time they leave the orphanage, there's a very high probability you have young girls into prostitution and you have young men going into crime. So rather than seeing the cycle continue, we like to see churches reach out to that 84% with the gospel and see their hearts change, and along with that, their futures.
Eric, I want to ask you about that because these orphanages are state-run, and some of the other you just think about Russia as being a very totalitarian state-run nation, and yet the government allows the churches into the orphanages and other areas of public life?
Well, there's a balance. There really is a balance. If you just come with one hand, and in that hand is a Bible, and you're coming in, you're trying to get access, and you're saying, I want to come and run a Bible study, they're not going to let you in the front door. But these churches are faithful to build bridges, coming like with Orphans Reborn, through bringing fruit, through bringing other items to spend time with these kids. These kids begin to change, and the orphan leaders see that heart change in these kids means kids that stop destructive behavior. There's so many different perspectives on what changes an orphan's life. But the evidence is there when a child comes to faith and they see a father that will never leave them or forsake them. They find something that is a true answer to hope, and their lives are changed, and it's conducive to all the kids in the orphanages. And a lot of times these churches befriend these orphanages, help them in getting new blankets for beds and repairing beds and building simple relationships like taking people that are the teachers who can't get to the supermarket to the supermarket. And when they begin coming alongside, shouldering the burden of caring for these kids, really becoming a partner to these organizations, the doors become bridges for the gospel. So I think you have to come with two hands, one ready to work and care, and another hand that comes with the Bible. And we see both at play, of course, in James chapter 2, and I think both are at play in the ministries we see in Russia.
Michael, as you've just come back and now as president of SGA, and there are so many different ministries, this organization is doing so much, and yet the model is to come alongside and help Russians who are ministering too. But the distances are unbelievable. And so, Eric talked about Far East Russia. Of course, you've got all the other countries that you have to get to. So how do you sort of manage those logistics, and do you have some new ideas for that?
Well, basically, the infrastructure that we have set up here as a ministry is that we have offices here in the United States, Canada, England, Australia, and New Zealand. And we also have what we call regional ministry centers in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And we have those centers are fully staffed for the distribution of the resources that we're talking about. And a lot of it is a function of the networks that we set up because, as I mentioned, we sponsor a number of seminaries and Bible institutes, and hundreds of students have gone through those Bible institutes and have been sent out into previously unreached towns and villages.
It's just wonderful.
We're talking about not only the key countries that Eric mentioned, but a number of countries like Tajikistan and Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, places like that, where the graduates of these schools have been sent into. And the thing about what happened under communism was that most of these countries were conquered at one time and held together by force. And what the communist government did was they sent Russians into all those countries, and they forced everybody to speak the Russian language. So for the most part, these people are accessible through essentially one language. And so it's just not the three countries, it's all these other countries where these pastors and students and graduates have been sent into to plant churches. So that essentially is our distribution network. And you're right, Russia is a huge country. It's 11 and a half time zones long. They've got 147 million people. And most of the population is centered west of the Urals, but there's just tremendous opportunities beyond the Urals in Siberia and Far East Russia. And so, for example, we have an initiative now called Reach Russia Now, which I'm going to have Eric talk about more specifically. Okay. But essentially, there's about 3 or 4 million people living in in a landmass the size of the lower 48, and people are donating us airplanes so that we can reach those people, preach the gospel, and plant new churches among those populations. So it's a huge landmass, but it really is a function of the efficiencies of the networks that have been set up and the common language.
I'm going to open up the phones, 800-351-1212. We've actually already had some people calling in just with a question for either Eric or Michael about ministry in Russia and the former Soviet Union. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk about young people in Russia right after this.
A 2013 survey asked people around the world whether sex without marriage is morally wrong. Every country where more than 90% said, yes, it's morally wrong, Islamic. The worst two, tied at 6% saying it's wrong, France and Germany, the nations of Calvin and Luther. Catholic Italy, 11%. Simply sad. The United States, well, 31%. Not even 1 in 3 thinks extramarital sex is morally wrong. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And I have the privilege of speaking with Mike Johnson and also Eric Mock from Slavic Gospel Association. Mike is in Illinois, where the organization is headquartered, and Eric is in Ukraine. Let's go back right now to Ukraine, Eric, because Michael mentioned that I needed to ask you about Reach Russia Now. Tell us about that.
Well, I will, and it is just exciting. And then if I can put a footnote, please come back to Ukraine. I'd love to tell you also about what's happening here. Reach Russia Now is nothing short of exciting. Really in our world today, between the internet, between the globalization that is going on, literally I can get on a plane and get anywhere in the world. And things don't seem to be really hidden from view. Yet in the eastern part of Russia, a vast landscape of remote villages. I was there in December, and it was 55 below zero when we were teaching. Wow. We were there in Yakutsk teaching the Bible to a group of men who 2 years ago had never had dedicated Bible teaching, who called upon the leadership of SGA to come out and say, please teach us God's word, where we're teaching the word in two languages, Russian and Sakha, where they're hearing the word of God and gaining essential tools for teaching and preaching. And my wife and I were there just a few weeks ago when the first Cessna 172 landed that will be used to go out into these remote villages and take the gospel. And the men were coming up and said they're so excited that they're able to preach from God's word, not just their opinion, but preach from God's word. And so Reach Russia Now is an initiative where we look especially to the 2/3 of the landmass, the eastern 2/3 of Russia that is east of the Urals, predominantly in the far eastern 9 states that, as Michael said, are about the lower 48, where there's hundreds and hundreds of villages that have never heard the gospel in multiple people groups that are out there. We're talking about Sakha, Evin, Evinki, Nanai, these different people groups that are out there that have never heard the hope of Jesus Christ. And God is raising up missionary pastors. We're seeing missionaries come out of churches that are ready under Orphans Reborn to reach orphanages, 12 new locations growing fast. We're seeing Bible teaching now in 2 locations, Khabarovsk and Yakutsk. We're seeing compassion ministry. We're seeing summer camp ministry. We're seeing Christmas ministry. And all these are tools to equip the local church for the work of ministry. It's an exciting time. And on top of that, partnering with Kingdom Air Corps, an organization up in Alaska, we are seeing 172s be brought out to central locations across Russia. Imagine flying across an area completely covered in water and literally not accessible for any set of roads. You could take boats, maybe, and you go to these remote villages that have never seen an airplane, and you land outside these remote villages, and you come up to them, and you start talking about the hope that you have within you, and the hope of Jesus Christ, and it is amazing.
When you get to a village, where do you go to talk to people? They don't have church buildings, do they?
No, but you can't imagine what it's like to drop a 172 down into a small village. It draws quite a
They all gather?
Yeah, well, it was almost horrifying at one point, sitting in the cockpit and watching them pull on the yoke and grab onto the wing and see what they were looking at. But it was pretty amazing. This was landing in a light aircraft in a field outside of Yakutsk. What an amazing thing to see. And so there's that aspect. The other aspect is in these remote villages, they're curious why someone would come. Part of it is they're frightened, and so you have to build relationships. Again, you don't walk up and just lead with the gospel. You lead with love. You need to open that door. And so a lot of times they'll show up with medical supplies. They'll show up with food, show up with things that would make a difference for the people there. And so you have to build those relationships, become bridges for the gospel. But the exciting part is that this is really a frontier ministry. This is an exciting ministry where all the facets of SGA are coming to bear. And it's new. It shouldn't be new, but it is new. And what we're seeing is part of the aspect of globalization that we're seeing is these people groups are reverting to their mother tongues now. And we're seeing, even though we have the fabric of the gospel being passed on in the Russian languages, people want to hear how to teach and plant ethnically unified churches. So we're seeing churches like a Sakha church, which is in Yakutia, and they really had their first building of their own in 2007. So it's a real recent ministry, and it's very exciting to see how the gospel is going forth. And so SJ has a wonderful privilege of equipping missionary pastors and missionary pilots and working with the churches there to take the gospel to villages that are brand new.
Eric, I also, as you mentioned, we do need to discuss what's going on in Ukraine. That is one area that we read about in the news, not as much lately, but they're still fighting there. And, of course, we had Russia's aggression in Crimea. But what is the situation with churches there, the spread of the gospel? You're there now, so what are you doing in this trip? Tell us about it.
Well, let me give you the landscape first. The landscape is that there is a separation in eastern Ukraine known as the Minsk Accord Line. On the eastern side of the Minsk Accord Line, there are a mix of what they say are Russian separatists or Russian or new Russian government, as well as pretty likely Russian soldiers. And that is really kind of felt in their minds as a little bit of kind of a mix of Russian and Ukraine territory. Onto the west side of Ukraine is the government-controlled side. The fighting that really took off after I think we refer to it as the Orange Revolution, the fighting that really took off that led to the ousting of Viktor Yanukovych had really decimated the country. Crimea was taken, which took a substantial amount of the oil reserves. Eastern Ukraine was the industrial base. The fighting destroyed the industrial base. Over 2 million internally displaced people were moved into the rest of the country. And I understand a recent number I heard today was 1.4 million internally displaced peoples that still remain unsettled, trying to find a way to integrate into society. What that means is in the republics closest to Lugansk, and Lugansk and Donetsk, it's an area filled with a great number of refugees, and the churches are standing in the gap to make a difference. Here in Zaporozhye, SGA, through the Crisis Evangelism Fund, has been equipping churches to take food aid, medicine aid, and other items both into the government-controlled area as well as in what they call the occupied area, equipping churches to take the gospel. The newswire doesn't carry the conflict anymore because the focus, and in many ways this is rightly so, the focus on the Middle East and the issues with North Korea, these are really big issues. But the reality on the ground here in Ukraine is there's tremendous suffering. There is tremendous need, and it would take 20 years of dedicated efforts to restore the infrastructure in eastern Ukraine. What that means is they knew I was going to be on the line with you tonight, and the teams here in Zaporozhye that are putting out humanitarian aid to the churches here said, please tell the listeners the need is still great. Please continue to get behind the Crisis Evangelism Fund so we can equip these churches with the ability to purchase food, to get food in there, to get the gospel out there, to get medical missions in there, because for the near future, the need is tremendous.
Well, Mike, let me just go to you then. What can people do? How would they link up to be involved in helping in Ukraine? I mean, you have a spot on your website that we could send people directly to?
Well, I would just say that there are a number of things that have been mentioned in our conversation today. One was our need to support the orphans, and we have a program called Orphans Reborn that we have had established many years ago, and thousands of orphans have been administered as a result of that. So that's one area. Another area is the Crisis Evangelism Fund that Eric just mentioned, and if anybody has an interest in that, they can contact us. We also have a program called Emmanuel's Child, which is a program that is designed for Bible preaching churches during the Christmas time to reach out with the love of Christ to the people in their communities to both evangelize and disciple. So I would just say that we have an email address. If you'd like to go to our website, it's sga.org, or you can send us an email at info@sga.org.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can also link through to sga.org from pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Evelyn Shatkin, Linda Shiflett, and Doug Maples took prayer seriously. So seriously, in fact, that they decided to meet together after work and pray for a colleague that had been causing them problems. They met at the cubicle of their colleague after work on a day that she was not even in the office. Their prayer got pretty serious. They anointed the cubicle with oil, according to Shatkin's religious tradition. They prayed for peace and joy for their colleague. They even commanded demons to leave their colleague as they prayed. Word got back to the supervisors about the after-hours prayer meeting, and after an investigation, the supervisor concluded that, quote, the nature, the manner that they're praying, what language they're using, determines whether the prayer was harassment. Human Resources agreed and notified the prayer givers that they would be terminated for their harassing prayers. Shatkin and Shiflett asked for a religious accommodation for the prayers, but that was denied. They were fired. First Liberty Institute took up their case. A federal district court sided with the employees as it concluded, quote, can a prayer for someone constitute harassment when the alleged object of the prayer is unaware of it? This court suspects not, unquote. In fact, the court concluded that the college's own policies protected the prayers of these employees. Firing someone for their peaceful exercise of religion at work doesn't have a prayer. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
It was a little rush at the end of the last segment, but I do want to mention that you can find out more about all these ministries under the rubric of SGA, Slavic Gospel Association, by going to sga.org, and pointofview.net also has a link to it. We mentioned a couple of places where if you're moved and you want to help, there's the Crisis Evangelism Fund where, I mean, we do miss out on the fact that there is just a huge need there in Ukraine and people are suffering. I will say that one news outlet here in the U.S. that does cover a lot of that is the Daily Signal from Heritage Foundation. You can read a lot about Ukraine and what's going on there. That's about the only place. And then really, this is great. Michael mentioned Emmanuel's Child Christmas outreaches. So at Christmas, we've all seen these opportunities where we can send things for Christmas for children. And there is one through SGA, Emmanuel's Child Christmas Outreach. Churches are already preparing for this. And you can go to sga.org/IC, and you might want to get your church involved in this. I think it's a great ministry. So those are a couple of opportunities. This is not the last time I'm going to have the folks from SGA on because there's so much to talk about. We're in the last segment of this interview. But, Mike, tell us about, it's so important to reach young people. I mean, we know that here in the U.S., also in Russia and all these countries. So tell us what SGA is doing in that regard.
Well, what's interesting is that, as you know, Penna, I was called out of the advertising world in New York to enter into ministry, and I was here for a number of years as the vice president of advancement. And when the wall came down, I think the demographics were such that most of the people that were open and sensitive to the gospel were sort of 40 plus. But as time went on and I came back, what I'm now being told is across those countries, the people that seem to be the most responsive are children and young people through 30-something. And so it's really critical that we develop programs that will equip those churches to reach this particular generation for Christ. So a lot of so one example is in another 2 or 3 weeks I'll be attending a large youth conference in St. Petersburg, Russia, where a rally of people involved in youth ministry as well as people who are being trained in youth ministry are being gathered together to sort of celebrate the work that they're doing and learn best practices and go out and reach young people in their regions. So that's a really important part of what we're doing, and a lot of the programs that we've developed, some of the programs that you've mentioned, are really designed to reach these young people for Christ. So this is a tremendous opportunity, and we're seeing significant growth and spiritual sensitivity of people at that particular age to the things of God, and so we're going to continue to expand that, particularly now that I've come back into the ministry, and I'm working with people in this particular segment.
And they even have summer camps over there.
Yeah, what's great about summer camps over there is that we send thousands and thousands of children to summer camps, and that's kind of an institution over here.
Are these done by the churches, or do you do it?
Yeah.
The churches run?
These are summer camps that that have been established by local churches, and then we raise money for the scholarships for the kids to attend the camps. And I would say probably 80 to 90% of the kids that attend those camps come from unchurched families. So this is an opportunity to reach this generation for Christ as well. And the other thing is that we're involved in some ministry in Belarus now, where there still exists the ongoing effects of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which took place, I believe, in 1986.
You're kidding.
And radiation is still an issue, so that allows us to bring them out of the radiated zones, receive medical treatments, experience camp, and hear about the things of God in those camps as well. So there's both a medical component to these camps as well as a recreational component as well as a spiritual component.
Eric, do you have anything to add with regard to this broad ministry to young people?
Oh, yeah. I tell you what, I'm a pastor myself, and there's nothing greater than seeing a young person, especially a teenager, reminded that if they've been saved, they've been gifted, and God's ready to use them today. The youth ministry that we see in Russia really has the heritage of standing for the sake of the gospel under the years of communism. Imagine living under a time where you don't know if your grandfather or your father will be taken away in the middle of the night by the KGB. That means some teenage young man, 15, 16 years old, can be next up in the saddle to be preaching the gospel. What we see in the youth ministry in Russia, and what we're so excited about getting behind, is we see the local churches equipping young people to be the life of the church today as well as the church of the future. So we see the national ministry teams that we support providing the training and the literature to train up the youth leaders. But what part of what SGA does as well is we provide financial resources to allow them to go out every month on missions trips, local mission trips, to serve next to their missionary pastors, to be singing, to be doing community projects, and then to be actually functioning in their own churches, to be learning to teach, to preach, to lead in the praise team. Even last week in my own team, I had a couple of 20-somethings preaching on Bodybuilding Sunday. You put them all to work, and all across Russia, the youth ministry work that SGA is doing is focused, not only Russia, but Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan. We're focused on helping young people be the church of today, not only the church of tomorrow. And so they really are making a profound difference. There's so many exciting things, and we haven't even touched ministry in Muslim lands in Central Asia and around through the Caucasus, where I was there a few weeks ago, and you're seeing entire churches of people who were all Islamic, all Muslim, even a gentleman that was calling out prayers in a tower, in a minaret, who have all come to faith and are proclaiming the gospel in a land where it could cost them their life to do so. You could almost spend a whole episode, a segment on that. And SGA has got 4 major fronts, either in the battlefront in Ukraine, the Islamic area in the south, dealing like we are in the U.S. with a slower church, an apathetic church in the more developed areas, and then the wide open mission field in the eastern part of Russia. It's an exciting time, and we call upon your listeners to jump on in.
Well, Eric, you've just given me an idea for another program, because we're coming up on the end of this hour. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to join me from Ukraine to talk about the ministry of Slavic Gospel Association. We do need to have you back, though, because that is fascinating to know that entire Islamic groups are coming to Christ. I mean, I don't think that we can even believe that could happen here in the U.S., but it's happening.
Well, let me give you just a 20-second, and I can't tell you where I was, but I'm sitting in a room surrounded by mud walls in a remote village. The pastor of the church used to call out the Muslim prayer, calling for global jihad, calling for the death of an American. I was there with the pastor, an American. We sat down together and we sang, "How great is our God, how great thou art," an amazing grace together in a congregation that was 95% Muslim converts, staying inside an area so no one could hear us singing, worshiping our wondrous God. It was 102 degrees, no air conditioning.
Unbelievable.
And we were all sitting on the floor, as they do traditionally there. We serve a great God, and men can come up with laws to change things. Politics can change things. But God is building his church, and I am excited to say the gospel is going forward, and SGA has this tiny role in equipping the churches to do that ministry. It's really exciting.
Eric, thank you so much for sharing this and for joining me. And Mike, too, thank you so much for just the overview and letting me know what you're doing. I wish and pray for all the best for you, and we'll certainly have you back.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Penna.
guys. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do, for the next half hour, an open line. There's some breaking news and a lot to talk about, so get ready if you want to call in, 800-351-1212.
Good information is vital. Point of View works to bring you that each and every day. But as Diane in Arkansas illustrates, passing that information along, educating others, is something you can help with. Diane is a college professor. She influences the next generation, and she wrote, "Thank you for your informative letter. I used some of your quotes when I was teaching the Declaration of Independence in my literature class." Diane, like so many, hopefully like you, is taking what she received from Point of View in letters, online, through our app, on the air, and rebuilding truth in this post-truth culture. All of that takes a team. Join the Truth Team at Point of View. Find out how you can help at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. Show your commitment. Make a difference today, right now. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I'm constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. It is our open line, and our call-in number is 800-351-1212. If you would like to weigh in on anything we're going to talk about, or even what ministry is going on in Russia and the former Soviet Union. We're so grateful to our two previous guests, Mike Johnson and Eric Mock, who enlightened us on those issues and their ministry with Slavic Gospel Association. Well, turning to U.S. politics, there's never a dull moment, and it was really quick because we had a new White House communications director 10 days ago, and he's already out. Anthony Scaramucci was hired 10 days ago. As White House communication director. He sort of started a domino effect because Sean Spicer, press secretary, quit. He didn't want to work for him. And also, Scaramucci basically blasted the White House chief of staff, Reince Priebus. Priebus also quit. Actually, I think he was forced out by the Trump administration. And so Scaramucci seemed to have all the cards. He's out today. In the meantime, of course, we got a new chief of staff, and his name is General John Kelly. He's already starting his job, and there's a piece in the Washington Post entitled, "Trump enlists Kelly to enforce order, but can the zoo be tamed?" That's a big question, but it looks like the firing or the removal of Anthony Scaramucci as White House communications director is directly a result of Kelly taking on his job and beginning to work as White House chief of staff. Scaramucci, when he accepted the position as communications director, insisted that he would not, that he would report to President Trump. He did not want to report to Reince Priebus, and he issued pretty much a profanity-filled screed that included a lot of negatives about Reince Priebus, who used to be at the RNC. He helped Trump raise money to be elected to the White House, but he's been sort of on the outs, and now he is out. But now we have John Kelly, and it feels to me just from these early actions that he's going to take a strong hand there in the White House. It sounds like it needs it. There's some varying factions there, as anybody who listens and watches can see. So we are taking your calls if you have any opinions on that issue. It's 800-351-1212. And, what do you think of he's been moved, of course, from Homeland Security. John Kelly, General Kelly, has been Secretary of Homeland Security since pretty much the beginning of the Trump administration. He's done a great job, and now the president has trusted him enough to be his chief of staff. And I think it will be different. Chiefs of staff need to have the gravitas that will, attract a president to be able to fall in line a little bit because they need to be able to kind of make things move along. And I think Reince Priebus could never do that with Donald Trump. And so, a lot of people think, including Trump, I guess, that Kelly will be effective and that will be needed. So we'd love to hear from you on that issue. There's another sort of something percolating ever since the healthcare vote last week, in which the skinny version of Obamacare, the skinny repeal, did not make it because of the votes of John McCain and a couple of other senators, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. And so, there's been sort of a difference of opinion. Should the Congress just give up on healthcare and move on to taxes or the economy or something else? Just forget this. It's so frustrating. Let's give up. But there are a lot of people today saying, and one of them is Robert Moffat at the Heritage Foundation, saying that Congress needs to go right back to work on health care reform. There's too much at stake. It has to get done. And so Robert Moffat, I'm just going to quote one little bit from him. He says Senate members need to go back to work immediately and revisit the central policy problems created by Obamacare. The skinny repeal just couldn't take all of that on. And so maybe a skinny repeal is not the way to go. Moffat says that senators need to cut Obamacare's slew of taxes, give the people and their state lawmakers the freedom to decide for themselves whether or not they want to keep Obamacare's insurance regulations and mandates. And also go back to thinking about phasing down the higher Medicaid payments to able-bodied adults that came with Obamacare. So some of the things that were being talked about earlier on, and some of the things that actually passed through the House version of repeal, he thinks they should be brought back, and that, you know, he doesn't see this as a lost cause. This is Robert Moffat, and he's been observing and working in really government and welfare policy for many, many years. He says Trump should light a fire under both Republicans and Democrats in Congress by simply canceling the illegal taxpayer insurance subsidies for congressional health coverage. You've been hearing that a lot in the news, that the subsidies under Obamacare for members of Congress need to be done away with. If they can't pass repeal for Obamacare, then they shouldn't get these subsidies. That's what a lot of people say. House and Senate members and staff then, in that case, would fully experience Obamacare the way millions of middle-class Americans do, having to pay inflated premiums without the benefit of special taxpayer subsidies. So that's one question, and we'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Do you think that the Congress should continue their attempt, it's failed so far, to repeal Obamacare, or do you think that they ought to move on to something else? And if so, what? Apparently, well, the editors at National Review say that the skinny bill does not have to be the last try, and that we should continue to work on this. And I'm surprised to hear this, because last Friday we heard President Trump saying, just let it die and see what happens. But he sort of changed his tune, and others are weighing in on this. And at National Review, they said now that the skinny bill has been defeated, a lot of Republican senators are saying they still want to work toward repeal and replacement. So if they mean it, they do have some options available. They could do another slim bill, maybe not quite as slim as the last one. And they could do one, they could also do one that's a little bit more like the House bill, but make some changes. And then there's another one that National Review says might provoke some grumbling from Senate conservatives. In fact, they say they're saying it through gritted teeth themselves. But if the bill also included spending cuts, perhaps they could sell it. I don't know. So another slim bill would be one, and there would be one to abolish the fines, but take some steps to keep that from raising premiums. And then earlier Republican bills have also, they have done that, allowing insurers to offer bigger discounts to young people. So that would make it work a little bit better. So anyway, there are several ideas that are still stirring around out there. And I guess the question is, do you think that they should keep trying? Or do you think that, are you just frustrated with the whole process of trying to repeal Obamacare? Those of the population that are affected by it, I think they're realizing that it's just way too expensive. They're not going to be able to have insurance unless this is repealed. So it may be worth a try. We'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. And take a look at pointofview.net. You'll find some articles. I want to bring another topic up having to do with Christianity, since that was the way we started our program. And that is, are non-denominational churches growing faster and more popular than churches have like the name Baptist or Presbyterian in it? Is it better today to leave those out and just call it a Christian church? Do Protestants prefer that? Do you prefer that? Well, give us a call, 800-351-1212.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, we've heard quite a bit these days about fake news, but what about fake science? That is the title of a book by Austin Ruse. He has served as the president of the Center for Family and Human Rights, where he testifies to our government and the United Nations about important issues. He was on my radio program recently to talk about some of the misinformation and false information presented in the media and in various governmental hearings. Some of the book deals with homosexuality and the transgender issue. One chapter addresses whether homosexuals are born that way and whether orientations are immutable. In other words, can people change their sexual orientation? Another chapter addresses the studies that attempt to argue that there is no difference between traditional parents and homosexual parents rearing children. This grand experiment on children has been detrimental to their physical and psychological health. That is why he wanted to set the record straight. Some states have very strict labeling laws for food. Even a minuscule amount of a naturally occurring chemical must have a warning label. But Austin Ruse points out that in order to hit the cancer target zone for acrylamide, a child would have to eat 182 pounds of French fries every single day. A teenager wouldn't even do that on a dare. For decades, Austin Ruse has been testifying on pro-life issues. He reminds us in one chapter that nearly everything the secular media and pro-abortion groups say about abortion is a lie. The same could be said about these groups and what they say about sex education. And he laments how the population control advocates are driving many countries towards a demographic winner. I recommend you read the book, and if you're skeptical of the claims, check out the more than 40 pages of endnotes documenting his critique of fake science. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. This comes out of BP News Baptist Press, and the title of the article is Gallup, Non-denominational Protestants on the Rise, and it talks about a dwindling percentage of Americans who identify with a specific Protestant denomination. So some churches are re-emphasizing biblical doctrine to make up for that, but they still don't want to put the name of their denomination within the church. They think that they're doing better without that. Others say we ought to keep our distinctives and we ought to call ourselves whatever we are. And so I asked for calls on that and would love to hear from you what you think about it. According to this Gallup polling organization, 30% of American adults identified with a specific Protestant denomination in 2016, and that's down from about 50% in 2000. And so this gave rise to this article, and just wondering what people think. Gallup claimed that the shrinking percentage of Americans who identify with a specific Protestant denomination stems from two things. One, there are fewer Protestants of any kind in the American population. And also, those who self-identify as Christians increasingly put themselves in the non-denominational category. They say we're non-denominational instead of saying that we are, but they still say that they're Protestant. So we'd love to hear from you on this. We've got some calls coming in. Let's go to Stephen. He's retired Air Force, calling in from Georgia on GNN. Hi, Stephen. Thanks for calling.
Hi, it's good to be listening to Point of View. You do a very good job. I enjoyed the program.
Thank you.
I was a chaplain in the Air Force, did 30 years and most of it as a chaplain. If you want to be a chaplain in the military, you have to have endorsement. that endorsement means that you need to have a denomination that is endorsing you. Denomination can be a good thing because it defines who you are. When someone says I'm non-denominational, it doesn't necessarily define who they are in terms of their faith system. So people that are ignorant of that and say, well, denomination doesn't make any difference, they're really not admitting how important it is to define what their belief system is.
So saying the denomination sort of helps you define what your belief system is. But I think what some people think is like it would be better to just define it. Speak your faith, tell people what you believe, and they don't necessarily have to like think they know just from knowing that you're a Baptist or a Presbyterian.
Well, the difference there is, or the importance of, I don't think denomination divides us as much as we think that it does. But, I mean, as a chaplain, I had supervisors, and I'm Baptist, who were Methodists. We got along and we worked together and we did ministry together, but we knew that we had differences in terms of theology. You know, terms like Arminian and Calvinistic and what have you. They actually do mean something. They define something about yourself. Does that mean that one person who's Arminian is not saved and the Calvinist is? No, not at all. It just says that there are differences in terms of our theology that may be important. One of them I think that's extremely important that isn't even discussed is what I call replacement theology. You have a lot of Protestant churches that have taken Israel and said, well, Israel is the church. It's not literal Israel, which, you know, is an important issue, but does that define salvation? No. It just shows that there are differences in terms of belief systems.
Okay,
so
Stephen, thanks for your call. Yeah, I guess I think for you and I think for a lot of us, when we hear a denominational label on a church or on you say I'm a Methodist or whatever, we know a lot about you because of that. And so that's, in a sense, a good thing. I do want to go back to the phone, see what other folks think. So thank you for your call. I really appreciate it. And, you know, I did notice in this this article about this issue that was in BP News, there's a pastor, I actually met him before. His name is J.D. Greer. He's pastor of the Summit Church in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. And this is an example of what I'm talking about. I remember when they started this church and they named it the Summit Church, and they specifically did not put anything about Baptist in the name of the church, even though it is a Southern Baptist church and it's part of the Southern Baptist Convention. And so, you know, I thought, well, great, you know, that's really good for people that have a negative connotation of Baptist. But as our last caller said, really, most people are not that concerned about denomination, but doctrine is important. So, you know, I think that's kind of the discussion we're having here. So we'd love to hear from you. If you've got a call, 800-351-1212. We'd like another opinion on that. We're kind of taking our own little poll here at Point of View. This piece at Baptist Press, there's a quote here from a man named, let's see, what is his name? Kevin Smith. He's executive director of the Baptist Convention of Maryland and Delaware. And he said he's not surprised by these findings that Gallup has made. He said, as we have a greater number of therapeutic pulpits and fewer pulpits preaching clear biblical doctrine, then denominational identity gets muddy, cloudy, and irrelevant. He says, I've always felt a responsibility to make sure members of churches I pastored have understood why we are Baptist. So explaining, I think, and being very clear about not only your denomination, but your theology, and a lot of times those are the same thing, is important. And, you know, whether or not you need the name Baptist, whether you need the name Methodist in the title of your church, I mean, I think you should be as descriptive as possible. But a lot of people think that especially young people are more attracted by a name that does not have a denomination in it. So it's kind of a fun discussion to have, and we are having it here on Point of View. This Kevin Smith said that churches that have a membership process generally have membership classes. They have a doctrinal component, and they teach theology well. And so, you know, that theology part is being done fairly well in many of these churches. How important is the name, though, to the church? I guess that's the the question that we have. So Smith says, I feel pretty good about the Southern Baptist identity as it is so driven by the Great Commission and some of the other boards at the SBC. This data that Gallup provided was drawn from phone interviews of lots of people. So it's going to be an issue. It's going to be something that folks are going to discuss. Let's take a call from Charlie in Kentucky and see what he thinks about it. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for calling.
Hi. I'm glad to listen to your program many times over the years. First time I've ever called in, I was in the truck coming home. Anyway, I think we need to keep the names. I'm a United Baptist, okay? That doesn't mean that I'm the only one going to heaven. It means that I identify with other people who believe the way I believe. And, you know, when I go down the road and I see the word United Baptist Church, I know what they believe. I see a Missionary Baptist Church, I know what they believe. And Pentecostal, Holiness, Methodist, whatever. And I think it identifies. And there are people who, they say non-denominational. But it's like I told to the lady that answered the telephone, you know, to form a denomination, if you and I decide to form a church and we list what we believe in, we have just formed a denomination. And I think that around here at our part of the country, when it comes to non-denominational churches, then they, excuse me for saying it, but they get a little bit far off from the doctrine of the Word of God.
Yeah, I think you perhaps have one less entity keeping you accountable if you're not part of a denomination. But I guess what I'm talking about is churches that are part of a denomination, but they choose not to use that denomination in the name of their church. You see what I'm saying?
Right, but I don't see why they would not choose that now. There are churches that have been set up just in the last few years in our county that I know what their denomination is because I've known them all my life, but they in their name beside the road. And really and truly, the only reason we need a denomination and the only thing we need is out by the road is so that when I'm looking for a particular church, I know I found it.
Okay.
That's really the reason. You know, I think we need to keep it because it designates us as people will, where I go church, when I tell them where I go church, I'm a pastor, by the way, and then they form a basic belief of what I believe in, and common people together believe in the same thing. And I think we need those individual churches because I feel like that those that I cannot reach with the gospel, that church down the road that has a different name, who may believe a little different from me, that's all right. If they can reach that person with the gospel, I'm glad for it. Maybe I can't with my religion and my denomination, but maybe that church down the road that goes by a little bit different name, they may be the ones who can reach that lost person that I cannot reach.
Well, Charlie, thank you so much for weighing in. You're delightful, and we are coming up on a break. We will continue to take your calls after the break, 800-351-1212. And also, I posted an article, and it really basically says that President Trump was right to rescind the transgender policy that Obama implemented in the military. Elaine Donnelly is going to join me to talk about what's next. I mean, the president announced this in a tweet. How is he going to implement it? We'll talk about it right after this.
Rebecca Hagelin has been influencing public policy as an author, columnist, and executive at places like the Heritage Foundation for more than 30 years, and Point of View Radio stoked her fire.
I used to turn it on every day, and when my husband would come home from work, I would say, this is what they said on Point of View today, and this is what they said. I just wanted to be connected into the places where I could make a difference.
Rebecca has made a big difference with her life, and let's just say she's a big fan.
There's no better resource, there's no better truth sayer, there's no better place to go for information for people who are worthy of the money than Point of View.
Point of View makes a difference by inspiring and informing people who make a difference. And you can make a difference today when you invest in the Truth Team. Join us today. Find out how by calling 1-800-347-5151 or visit online, pointofview.net/team, 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this. You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. In just a moment, we'll be speaking with Elaine Donnelly, and I have posted an article at pointofview.net entitled, it's from the Washington Examiner, and it's entitled, Trump Right to Reverse Obama's Transgender Experiment on the Military. We're going to talk with Elaine. She's with the Center for Military Readiness about what happens next to get this actually entrenched and enshrined. It was done in a tweet. But first of all, I want to take another call here from Rachel, who's been waiting to talk about denominations. And should we keep the denomination in the title of the church? Is it better to be identified with your denomination or just say that I'm a Protestant or a Christian? She's in California listening in on KYCC. Rachel, thanks for calling.
Good afternoon.
What's your thought on this?
So I grew up in the church and never really identified with it per se. I had to have a Jesus moment, right? And a couple years ago, because I started needing to find a church home. And everywhere I went, when I went into a building of a church, there was either a doctrine issue, a theology issue, a worship issue, something like that. I couldn't connect. And so I just felt like every time I went somewhere and I would check it with the word, it wouldn't line up. So I have a little bit of a problem with that, that they're teaching Christians, number one, that they don't even open their Bible. They're cherry-picking, per se, verses out of the Bible and teaching on them and taking them out of context and things like this. And so then I think, why do I, as a Christian, not have any power spiritually, in my prayer life, in my financial life, in my relationships, and all of these different things? So a couple years ago, I was introduced to Sabbath and the Messianic roots of our Judeo-Christian faith, and it has changed my life. And so I know that there's a movement within the Christian faith to start getting back to the Hebraic roots and really learning the actual contextual culture and the Hebraic and Jewish traditions that are held, and really learning and studying and going deep into the Old Testament. And so that's my thought and my viewpoint, and I would really encourage anyone listening to make sure that they start praying about and getting in touch with who he was, who Yeshua was, and if we're grafted in, that we are adopted children and we need to take on those same traditions and beliefs. Thank you so much.
Okay, Rachel, thank you. I'm not quite sure how the denominational title or name of the church would help us with that. I think you do have to dig in, but we've got some more folks waiting on the line, but I want to bring in Elaine now. Elaine Donnelly is president of the Center for Military Readiness. This group has been around since 93, and they advocate high single standards in all forms of military training and sound priorities in the making of military social policies. And that is definitely what's at stake here in the transgender policies in the military. Elaine, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you, Penna. We've been talking about these issues for a long time.
We have. I mean, we've gone from women in the military to homosexuals in the military. And, the issue that for you is always readiness. And I think that is the statement that Donald Trump made in his tweet. It was about readiness, right?
Yes, and it's amazing how he got right to the heart of the matter. He didn't. You can't mess around with extra words when you've got 140 characters and 3 tweets. But this does not actually make the policy. It's the leadership that will lead the policy to be changed. And what will follow next are a set of revocations of regulations that were put in place by Barack Obama, directives, instructions, training programs. We put together a list of 15 of these directions that need to be revoked. And actually, we got them to the Pentagon months ago. And I think maybe the president is saying, well, let's get on with it. We know that these issues do detract from readiness. So he puts out a tweet. This is the way this president does things. And the Department of Defense, the various services, they're looking at the issue. They're going to come out with recommendations. They probably already have, and the president will get the process working. It'll be an orderly process because you see from one administration to the next, this president is not obligated to retain the Obama mandates to have transgenders in the military. People who are confused about gender identity suffer from a condition called gender dysphoria. Now, gender dysphoria treatments, which involve either hormone treatments, which are very expensive and can sometimes last a lifetime to maintain appearance, and often surgeries, which are very expensive, irreversible, of course. These kinds of treatments do detract from military readiness. It doesn't matter how much you want to be a soldier. If you are in need of hormone treatments and those hormone treatments can't deploy with you overseas, then you're not going to enhance the readiness of that troop that you belong to. And the president is just saying, we're going to do everything according to readiness. That's what the Secretary of Defense has said. We have a volunteer force. It is highly well-trained. And there's different groups of people in the military that are going to benefit from this. In fact, I listed 8 different groups in our news release from last week. For instance, military women who value what little privacy they have in private facilities. They are being trained right now, or they were trained, to get used to the idea of biological men being in the same spaces that they are. This is all part of the belief, which a lot of intelligent troops know is simply not true, that you can, by changing a bureaucratic mark on a piece of paper, you can change a man into a woman or a woman into a man. Well, biology says, no, you can't do that. You can change appearance, you can change hairstyle, you can even do surgeries, remove body parts. You're still, biologically speaking, either a man or a woman. It's in the DNA, which is in every cell of a person's body. So when you ask people in the military to pretend and endorse what they know not to be true, that is inherently demoralizing. And in the fullest sense of the word, that is going to come to an end, and none too soon.
Yeah, really. Listen, Elaine, you mentioned the tweet and the way the president did this. And, you know, as I'm starting to get used to this president, I'm realizing that he just jumps in there and makes a statement, and then he kind of lets everybody else implement it. And that's what's going to happen here. I've read things like the military is ignoring the order and, you know, pieces of news like that. But that's wishful thinking on the left's part, right?
No, the media is trying to drive a wedge between the president and the troops that he leads. It's ridiculous. That's a loaded word. Obviously, you don't make a policy change with a tweet. I mean, this is common sense. But leadership is what happens when other people are looking for excuses to do nothing. In this case, the president showed leadership. The next step is to look at all those 15 designations, memos, instructions, directives, everything that came from Obama, and systematically identify them and revoke them and announce what the new policy will be. This kind of process is nothing new. When a new administration comes in, anything done administratively can be changed in the same way. But you see, the media is trying to paint this as if, the president is letting down the troops. It's just the opposite. Yeah. The president has shown great support for the troops. He is delivering on his promise to eliminate political correctness in the military. And he's saying that we're going to put first things first. And if you're in the military, you don't want to be part of a social experiment. You don't want your job to be more difficult and more dangerous because of political considerations that Obama paid attention to. This is a very good thing. Here's another segment, doctors and nurses. Doctors and nurses are given no option not to participate in transgender treatments, therapies, authorizations, even surgeries. Now, many of the medical people know, of course, that these types of operations, removing healthy body organs, this is unethical. You're not supposed to do that. And they also know that all the hormone treatments in the world and even surgeries, it's not going to remedy the underlying psychological problem. Gender dysphoria must be terrible to live with. You have to have sympathy and compassion for people who have any kind of mental condition. It makes life very difficult. But for people who are medical personnel in the military, they know that having to provide these kinds of services and treatments, it's not going to improve that underlying condition, which involves a high risk of suicide. And suicide is a tragedy any day of the week in the military, and the rates are always going up, or they fluctuate. Why would we want to bring into the armed forces people who are at even higher risk of suicide? It really makes no sense in terms of military readiness.
Elaine Donnelly is my guest. We'll return after the break and continue to discuss this. I am going to ask her, what should Congress do now? Because the next president, if so inclined, could actually bring this back if he or she wanted to. So doesn't Congress need to weigh in on this and make it permanent? We'll be right back for more of Point of View. Stay with us.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Evelyn Shatkin, Linda Shiflett, and Doug Maples took prayer seriously. So seriously, in fact, that they decided to meet together after work and pray for a colleague that had been causing them problems. They met at the cubicle of their colleague after work on a day that she was not even in the office. Their prayer got pretty serious. They anointed the cubicle with oil, according to Shatkin's religious tradition. They prayed for peace and joy for their colleague. They even commanded demons to leave their colleague as they prayed. Word got back to the supervisors about the after-hours prayer meeting, and after an investigation, the supervisor concluded that, quote, the nature, the manner that they're praying, what language they're using, determines whether the prayer was harassment. Human Resources agreed and notified the prayer givers that they would be terminated for their harassing prayers. Shatkin and Shiflett asked for a religious accommodation for the prayers, but that was denied. They were fired. First Liberty Institute took up their case. A federal district court sided with the employees as it concluded, quote, can a prayer for someone constitute harassment when the alleged object of the prayer is unaware of it? This court suspects not, unquote. In fact, the court concluded that the college's own policies protected the prayers of these employees. Firing someone for their peaceful exercise of religion at work doesn't have a prayer. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to pointofview.net and you'll find an article there about President Trump being right to reverse Obama's transgender experiment on the military. It's out of the Washington Examiner, and one of the points it makes has to do with readiness, saying the military has a mission, and it's based on, actually, the military has a responsibility to discriminate. Other employers might be sued for discriminating based on certain laws, but in the military, they have the right and the responsibility to just find the best people to serve. And so this was a very good move on that score, wasn't it, Elaine?
That is correct. You have to do the right things for the right reason. The military defends individual rights. It defends our Constitution, but it must be governed by different rules. There are large groups of people who are not eligible for military service, if you're over 35 years old, if you have flat feet, if you have air sickness or any kind of psychological disorder like anorexia or bulimia, things that are pretty much in your mind when you know someone believes they are fat and overweight when they're real thin, you know that person needs medical care, psychological care. You don't turn that person into part of a civil rights group. And you don't say that, well, because there's all these people who have diabetes, heart conditions, whatever, we need them to serve in the military too, so we're going to accommodate them, even if it hurts readiness and hurts all the units to which they would be assigned. That doesn't make sense. You can't treat the military as if it was just another equal opportunity employer. But the previous administration, that is exactly what Barack Obama said. They said, the Obama people and even a couple of holdovers who are still in the Pentagon today said, well, diversity, demographic diversity is a strategic imperative. No, it's not. Military readiness is a strategic imperative. All other things are secondary. So you asked before the break, should Congress do something to make this policy permanent? Yes, they should. And the first thing they should do, a couple of members of the Senate, Senator McCain and Joni Ernst in particular, said, well, this shouldn't have been announced by a tweet. Congress has to be involved. Well, these two are both member and chairman of the Armed Services Committees. Why haven't they had hearings on this issue? Where have they been? If they want to come late to the party, great, but they need to look at the huge body of growing information about why this is a very bad idea. I'm making a collection of all the op-eds and commentaries on this issue. It's getting quite long. People are really onto this issue and realizing that even though we may know or sympathize with people who are confused about gender identity, there is absolutely no good reason to impose those problems on the military. It doesn't improve the military, therefore it shouldn't be done.
It does seem like Congress has been a bit behind the curve. Hopefully the bully pulpit of the presidency can lead them along. And, you know, what do you think, Elaine, about, I mean, today, this breaking news that now the communications director is out, or the communications shop director is out, and yes, it probably has to do with General Kelly being the chief of staff. He sounds like he's going to kind of whip things into shape. Do you think he'll have a good influence on getting this actually done?
Yes, no question about it. I think President Trump has surrounded himself with people who do have their priorities straight. He said in his tweets that he was listening to military leaders. And this is correct because three branches of the service, the Army, the Air Force, and the Marines, asked for at least a 2-year delay before the deadline went into effect to bring into the military new recruits. Now, there was an Obama holdover in the Pentagon, the number 2 man, Deputy Secretary of Defense, and he got that 2 months request for a delay down to only 6 months, which is almost meaningless. But now that 6 months can be used for the Pentagon to not only look at those regulations and how they're going to be repealed, but also to develop the rationale, to make public all the information that people like me who follow these issues all the time, all of this information should be made public. Why did 3 military services ask for a 2-year delay? We still haven't seen the documentation. What was the rationale behind their decision? All we know is the Obama holdover tried to ram it through anyway. The Secretary of Defense went along with that. And now the President has said, wait a minute, we need to get on with this. It's time. He announced his decision, and the rest will be done in an orderly fashion.
Let's take a call from Susan in Texas on this issue. Susan, thank you for calling in.
Yes, thanks. I was kind of looking at it a little different way. Like she just said, there are multiple anatomical and psychological reasons that you cannot serve in the military. But besides military readiness, it hurts military readiness to be transgender, but it hurts the transgender person. Also, y'all presented a report from Scott and White, psychiatrists and surgeons who actually treat these people, and one of the symptoms they showed was a higher incidence of tending toward depression and suicide.
Yeah.
And if a normal person that goes to war that doesn't have psychological problems is perfectly healthy, and when they see the trauma of war, they can get PTSD. And if somebody is already tending toward depression and suicide, if one of these transgender people would witness that kind of trauma and get PTSD, I don't know how they would ever heal. It just hurts them. Also, if they're already suicidal. You know, I mean, I respect anybody that wants to serve as a soldier. I don't want any of them hurt. But that's another reason we deny entry for that.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Susan. I appreciate your call, Elaine.
Yeah, as a combat veteran of Iraq, J.R. Salzman, S-A-L-Z-M-A-N, has written some articles and made that very point, that when you are in battle, everything is intense. Everything bothers everyone. You're always on edge. It's a jangle of nerves the closer you are to where the battle is. To inject into that atmosphere confusion about gender identity and all of the drama that's involved in deciding how you, I mean, you even have to think about, well, which pronoun should I use in addressing this person, male or female or both, or depending on what the day of the week is. There's a concept written into these regulations that's called RLE, which stands for real life experience. It means that the person who is confused about gender identity can take as long as a year off to go and live as a person of the opposite sex and see if they like it or not. Now, this is time off, of course, from military duties. It can even be done on a daily basis if you have someone who dresses in a male uniform by day and then goes out dancing as a woman by night. That's called real-life experience. The Pentagon has bought into this stuff. So what is the local commander to do? What are subordinates to do when they see their commander out there cross-dressing? There's also some deployability issues. Some nations of the world where our troops are deployed look not too kindly on cross-dressers. This makes these people non-deployable because they would be in greater danger. There's also physiological issues such as if you're a diver or a pilot and you're taking hormone therapy, it can throw off physiology in such serious ways you're not qualified to do that job while you're undergoing this treatment, and treatments can last a lifetime. So another, one large group of people who are, I think, celebrating the president's decision, this involves taxpayers and people who care about our defense budget. We need new helicopters. We need helicopter maintenance. We need a lot of things in the various services. We need sailors to be on new ships to patrol the ocean. If we divert millions and perhaps billions of dollars over 10 years to this kind of thing, it's not a very good investment at all. And one more quick point.
I got to let you go because the show is ending, but you have made even more points than we've made before on this issue. It's just a matter of common sense. The president has shown it. And Elaine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful evening.
A farmer will tell you that if you don't prepare the ground, if you never plant good seeds, don't expect a harvest. Weeds maybe, edible crop no. Achieving a positive result takes work and planning. If you're concerned about what's happening in our colleges, our marketplace, in the halls of government, let me ask, have you invested in pulling weeds and planting seeds? That's what the Truth Team at Point of View does. For decades, God has used this team to attack noxious mental weeds and to plant seeds of truth that have grown into changed lives. If you're already giving to this effort each month, we thank you. You share in the reward for what we harvest. If you're not, now is the time. $30, $65, $100. The more you invest on a regular basis, the more we'll reap together. Give online at pointofview.net or using the Point of View radio app, pointofview.net. Click at the top on Become a Monthly Partner or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate